Hello. All right. So now we have Neil, or sorry, we had Neil last time. We had Paul and Scott Tupper. Just want to make sure anyone's paying attention. They're going to be talking bean to cup, blockchain built by coffee people for coffee people. All right.
Thanks for being here, everyone. I am Paul Tupper, and this is my brother Scott. We have two companies that we have started to try and address a problem that we saw in coffee supply chain, and particularly the way that growers were impacted by a market that's changed over the last couple of decades. Over a lot of brainstorms, a lot of cups of coffee, and a lot of beers, Scott and I thought about the way that coffee was marketed to consumers. And what we saw was a confusing proliferation of labeling and certifications. Everyone from huge players to micro roasters was talking about how what they were doing was good for the world or good for the grower. And coming from backgrounds in nonprofit fundraising for environmental causes and international development, we thought we could come up with a business model that better reflected what consumers wanted from a cup of coffee and then also pass that impact back to growers. We're looking at a market that has largely paid growers the same since the mid-'70s. The commodity price for a cup of coffee this year is the same as it was in the early '70s, while the price of a cup of coffee to a consumer has grown by 500%. So in April of 2016, we came up with the idea for Owned to Origins, which is a coffee roasting company that facilitates a revenue share with our growing partners. And the idea was pretty simple. You as a consumer care that the coffee that you're purchasing is good for the world, and is good for the grower. And the grower wants to make a better livelihood. So we basically said, okay, let's pass money back. Let's facilitate a social and a financial transaction from the customer to the grower. And for the first year, that seemed like it was going to work out pretty well, and we're still doing it to this day. But what we found was, to hold ourselves accountable, we really needed a system. We needed a system of traceability, and we needed a way to verify what we were doing had impact. We needed a way to tell consumers the provenance of this product, what we're telling you goes into it, right? Whether that's a sustainability measurement, whether that's how much money the coffee grower was paid. How do you as a consumer actually believe that? And then going backwards, how does the grower actually get what we said that they were going to get, right? So how can we, if we're saying, the current system might talk about fair trade. No one really actually knows what that means, or very few people do. What we want to do is say, we have a revenue share system. This is what the grower gets from us. It's a transparent supply chain, and it's a transparent value chain. So our goal is really with Owned to Origins to provide a direct social and financial connection that kind of bridges over a long, convoluted supply chain in coffee from the grower to the consumer. Our need for transparency let Scott and I to take a dive and start a second company called Yave, which Scott is going to talk about a bit.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, Paul and I are brothers. We started Ownda with this goal of inclusionary growth for farmers because, as the previous slide showed, there is no actual growth for coffee farmers right now. The cost of production in Guatemala is at about $1.65 a pound green, and the commodity market price is at about $1 right now. Price on the commodity market is a function of a global futures exchange, and the traders in that exchange are not actually value-added service providers to the industry. So the goal for Yave, based on the deep dive that we did with Ownda, is to get those people out of the ecosystem and drive business only amongst the stakeholders who have a motivation to actually make coffee better. So we wound up diving really far into traceability, as Paul mentioned. I volunteered for USAID, a soft diplomacy arm of the US government, to do a supply chain audit for a Western Guatemalan cooperative representing 2,100 smallholders. The audit produced results that proved that the co-op did not know who the source of their coffee was. We're talking about 2,100 people that own the cooperative itself, yet they don't know which coffee they're selling at any given point in time. Beyond not having upstream identification of their product, they also had no downstream knowledge. So a buyer, like imagine a Stumptown or one of these bigger buyers that wants direct trade relationship coffee, can come to this co-op, demand to understand the impact of their purchasing, and they're not able to close that deal, or if they are, they do so on a certification basis, which is greenwashed and then becomes a risk to the claim that they've made of direct trade in that supply chain. We decided to roll up our sleeves and build a solution. We pitched the co-op themselves and a number of other stakeholders in Guatemala, and I've spent about half of the past year living in Guatemala and traveling there to get this off the ground. What we found was not so much a problem with the ability for a product to be traced all the way through the value chain. What we found was really hard. It's really hard to be enforceable with a traceability solution. And the more I pitched this and the more I thought about it, I realized that it wasn't necessarily the traceability itself that was going to convince stakeholders in the coffee value chain to adopt. It was better business for them. So using that theory, we started to develop a little bit more of a platform marketplace approach whereby we can connect buyers and sellers of coffee, and the traceability is simply encapsulated therein. That started to have an immediate impact on the way that people thought about this adoption curve. And of course, we have stakeholders in the coffee supply chain that represent 25 million smallholder farmers. It's an hourglass of a supply chain. So you have all these farmers on the bottom of the pyramid. That gets consolidated until you get to the point of export, international border, it's consolidated to an importer, and then it goes back out into the top of the hourglass where it will wind up being consumed in just as many cafes or homes as it was produced in, or more. It's really hard to do discrete unit level traceability in something like that, but you can encapsulate identity and market access with a marketplace approach. So that's where Yave came from. What will it take to disrupt coffee? So if commodity market price is 96 cents as it is today, and the cost of production in a country like Guatemala is $1.65, there needs to be a change, or people will ultimately realize they're not running a business, they're losing money all the time, and we're going to have a coffee supply challenge. That's one of the bigger risks for the big players in coffee right now, is shoring up their supply. The only way to really do that is to pay for it appropriately at the farm level, but they don't actually have the toolkit whereby they can do that. The reason is because all the information on a data flow standpoint is obfuscated by legacy systems, silos which are not updatable or communicable, and really an entrenched business process whereby people believe they have some secret about these relationships they have in the supply chain, and instead they're actually all collaborating to drive price down. So our idea with Yave is that we can make a marketplace that addresses that challenge. I think we zipped through it, but I wanted to make sure, I know we're running a little behind, Eric. I want to make sure we had time for questions. And what's up?
Just talk about Yvonne a bit. Oh, yeah. So the, just two more minutes here and then we'll get to the questions. The, ONDA has sourced from single growers and small cooperatives since the day it was founded in April 2016. That's been the model. This need for traceability, this need for guaranteeing that chain of custody, and that all of those assets around the physical product itself, the quality score, the sustainability data, right? The idea that a farmer who is represented to consumer all the way through the supply chain, that product, the market shows to pay about $10 more a pound. But historically, the farmer's not been getting that, right? So we've been using this revenue share model and this experiential marketing, and I hope you guys visit our booth out in the exhibition hall. You can actually tour some of our growers' farms and try our coffee. But we are really excited because the first end-to-end traced coffee where this traceability system is overlaid with the roast brand that had a goal of empowering farmers and bringing more dollars back to their pockets, so sustainable lifestyle, is actually incoming after a long and exciting journey of stakeholder adoption. It's finally inbound and will be landing in the U.S. in the next couple weeks. Do you want to tell the story of Yvonne real quickly?
Sure. So I would encourage anyone who's interested in experiencing this coffee to follow us through social media, because we're going to have the farmer herself visiting within the next week to talk about her experience. Yvonne Herrera is a single mother and also a university student in Villa Canales, Guatemala, who was not able to make money on her coffee farm during the past 4 years when the commodity market price has been this low. We were introduced to her through a mutual connection that I picked up in Guatemala, and we decided we would use her as the beta case for this blockchain pilot. We were able to connect price functionally to the end value that Onda was selling, which is cool, but we control Onda. And then we were also able to connect it to another roaster's end price that wound up being sold at Nordstrom. And her coffee was actually sold at Nordstrom with her picture on the bag. So she went from making about $1.30 a pound, which was not covering cost of production, to, depending on which of the two roasting businesses you're speaking about, $2.40 to $2.65 a pound. And so that's a really big triumph. And the fact that we were able to get another business outside of our own controlled value chain to adopt it, and they're marketing it and pushing her face forward at a major national brand, was a huge triumph for us. So I would encourage you guys, if you want to learn more about it, I think we have a talk with Yvonne at Mir in Fremont next, Wednesday the 26th. So that's a great opportunity to actually meet the farmer behind this journey, and she'll speak to her experience just getting value based off of the quality of her product.
So in this model, I mean, how do you see price being regulated, say, down the line, like ideal price, like coffee price regulation model?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So where we're at on an industry standpoint right now is that we have this dynastic pricing structure, which is the commodity price market. That is theoretically elaborated off of the global supply of coffee, although it can be fomented easily and manipulated easily. We are at a point of inflection industry-wide where in 2016, consumption of coffee actually outstripped the supply of coffee. So we're presented really a golden opportunity by the conditions driving people away from farms, whether socioeconomic or even climate change, where we actually can stop treating coffee as a commodity because it will no longer be seen as a commodity.
So I tried your coffee and it was really good. Thank you. It's my favorite part of the conference so far.
Thanks, Bob.
So I get the fact that you've got a good story, a good PR story with this particular farmer. Is the ultimate goal here to disintermediate all the middlemen so that we could buy directly from the farmer? Could we also disintermediate you? I mean, is that ultimately your goal, or what? I mean, how do you think about that?
So it is important to delineate you. Let's call Paul Onda and Scott Yave. And if anybody, we do have a booth number 13, so go try the coffee. That's totally possible, and I'm all for it. I think the closer consumer and producer can come together, the better. What's challenging in a situation like that is how do you achieve the economies by which you can control tropical logistics supply chains that enable that kind of market access to happen. Who I want to disintermediate right now is the futures traders.
Just a quick follow-up to that. The folks in the middle of the supply chain are service providers, and the more we think of them as such, instead of they could be moving bananas, they could be moving machinery, and as we think about them, right, their economies of scale, as Scott said, are massive. And so really it's a process-based thing and an information carrying mechanism.
In the green, you had a...
Okay.
Is there a type of farmer this works best for, like a size, or do you have to be of a certain scale, or are there co-ops there? I'm trying to figure out like who on the ground is looking at this going like, I can afford to do this and put these processes in place, and I have time to do this, to put these processes in place.
That's a great question. So it's important from a foundational level to understand why Paul and I are doing the work that we do with coffee. The reason we got so involved with traceability and trade logic is because we found that there was a selection bias present in the sustainability claims that we're seeing with direct trade and relationship coffee. These generally are farmers who can afford to go to a trade show or who can come to Seattle and meet a roaster in these kinds of situations that, by and large, the coffee supplier base is precluded from enjoying that kind of privilege. So we've tried to develop this as approachably and democratically as possible. Then there's the adoption question, right? So where is it possible? What language? Literally, like how much data is available there? How technified is that farm or farmer? We're trying to make it as simple as ordering an Uber to sell your coffee to somebody else in network for farmers, but that's where we're going, right? That's not where we are right now. So the goal is to truly democratize market access. How we get there is going to be case by case, and we're really big fans of scaling out rather than up. So we're hiring tech partners in Guatemala that understand the unique challenges there. We're hiring people in the Philippines, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's where it's headed.
We're also able to segment the coffees that we're sourcing. We have some of the best coffees in the world sourced, and those are cases of coffee gone right. You're talking about the right ingredients from an environmental perspective, but also the right treatment from the grower who probably has resources, right? And that's gotten us into some really cool places. We're serving our coffee in some of the best cafes in the city. On the other hand, that is not true to the business model, as Scott said. If we only select the best coffee growers in the world with the best environmental stories, then there's no opportunity for growth, right? And so what we have to be willing to do is to source coffees with an opportunity, and growers who with some training or with some added money in their pocket, right, so they're not operating at a loss, are actually able to make changes on the ground. And the great thing about coffee is better labor practices, better environmental practices yield a better product, which yields a better price. It's a circle that keeps going around. The other accessibility part, which I will be brief on, is just the way that any transaction is logged is going to be appropriate for the people at that part of the supply chain. So for a grower, that might be really more like an SMS-based logging of the asset.
Yeah, great questions. I've been fortunate enough to give this talk in a lot of different places around the world, but never at an actual blockchain conference. So this is a lot of fun for me to take it from the other side, where usually I go from the farmer end.
We've got time for one more, this woman has indicated. If anyone else has questions after this, Paul and Scott will be available. We've got a speaker's table out in the main hall, so you can go bug them there.
So I was curious, as this grows, how you envision providing some assurance of the integrity that the product, the actual coffee, is the coffee coming from that grower. Because if you're getting $10 more per pound, I am quite certain there'll be people who will try and take advantage of that and claim to have coffee coming from these growers or these locations in order to get the additional revenues. What's your thinking around the integrity of assurance that the product is, in fact, the same product that shipped out from that particular farm?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can break it down into essentially two answer buckets because each one has its own wormholes behind it. But the first one is that it already exists. There's a lot of paper trading for the big box companies that bring coffee up that's certified. So if I'm a farmer and I have a certification and I can get $2 versus $1, I'll just buy coffee from Paul and keep getting $2 and split the difference with him, right? And he's not certified in that case. I don't know if I made that clear. The other side of it is, what do we want? And I think trust comes up all the time in blockchain. Do we want a system of hypervigilance, or do we want a community of business partnerships? And so I tend towards business partnerships. I think that people will always find a way to game systems, no matter what. And if we can encourage this from a business standpoint, the truthing should be more inherent to where there's repeat business than how granular can we get on tracking. I know people who are doing DNA of a single grain of coffee. I know people who are doing machine-learned images of quality of coffee in the field. I'm really more about facilitating business between these stakeholders, and from there, I think it's a lot easier to identify where things may or may not be going wrong. Thank you. And just one more thing to clarify. So OndaOrigins.com. Onda is a Seattle roast brand. If you believe in this and it matters to you, source our coffee for your office. Yave is a blockchain trading and tracing solution. Yave.io, YAVE.io. And thank you.
Thanks, Paul and Scott. All right, we're going to take a couple more minutes, and Sarita's going to come up and speak with us about using blockchain for airline vouchers. We're going to try to get back on schedule now.